My name is Evelyn Vance. At 34 years old, my older sister decided I had lived independently for long enough. She didn't ask me how I was feeling, she didn't consult a doctor, she simply booked a consultation. We were at a Sunday brunch, poached eggs, imported caviar, bottomless mimosas, the heavy linen napkins that cost more than my first car. That was when she reached into her designer handbag, slid a glossy brochure across the table, and smiled like she was handing me the gift of a lifetime. "We toured a beautiful facility for you, Evie," she said softly, tilting her head with practiced sympathy. "A psychiatric wellness retreat, you'll absolutely love the private gardens." Her husband, Marcus, nodded along, checking his Rolex like the matter was already a closed case. Here is the thing they were both so deeply certain about that crisp autumn morning. They thought they knew exactly whose name was on the deed to the luxury penthouse they lived in. They thought they knew my financial limits, they were catastrophically wrong, and that glossy brochure wasn't even the most dangerous thing sitting in my sister's purse. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I set down my black coffee, I let the entire restaurant table go completely quiet. Then I looked her dead in the eye and said one calm, measured sentence that completely pulled the floor out from under every single plan they had made without me. "Welcome back to Grace and Grit Stories, where women the world wrote off quietly find their footing, their power and their unshakable voice." If a chapter of this story ever sounds like your own life, you are exactly the person I made this for. Drop a comment below, let me know where you are watching from, and be sure to hit that subscribe button. Let me tell you exactly who I am so the rest of this lands with the absolute weight it deserves. I am a forensic auditor. I don't just look at spreadsheets, I dissect them. I track ghost accounts, offshore shell companies, and wire frauds for federal crisis management cases. I read the fine print that puts corrupt CEOs behind bars, and I am exceptionally good at it. When I was 22, our family went through a financial crisis. My parents lost their small business, and my older sister Elena married Marcus, a flashy, fast-talking tech entrepreneur who promised to save them all. I was the quiet one, the scapegoat, the one who wore thrift store sweaters while Elena wore cashmere. I didn't complain, I simply built my life in the shadows. I took entry-level accounting jobs, then federal contracts. I saved every single dollar. I invested in tech startups, acquired commercial real estate, and built a silent empire. People assume a quiet woman is a simple one. They assume that if you aren't wearing diamonds, you must be drowning in debt. My family made that assumption for a decade. Lately, they had started talking about me in those gentle, patronizing voices. "Evie is so isolated," they would whisper at family dinners. "Evie forgets her appointments. Evie is acting so erratically." I never forgot my appointments. I simply stopped explaining my demanding federal work schedule to people who had already made up their minds about my worth. I kept a quote framed in my home office for 10 years. "The bank doesn't care who sleeps in the master bedroom. It only cares whose name is on the deed." I never in a million years thought I would need to deploy that philosophy at my own family brunch. But I was about to, because the sister handing me photographs of psychiatric gardens had absolutely no idea which gardens I already owned, and I had spent 10 long years saying absolutely nothing about it. Telling myself that my silence would be interpreted as grace. Telling myself that my financial protection would eventually explain itself. That was my singular mistake, not pride, not weakness. I trusted my quiet loyalty to do a job that only legally binding words can do. The brunch was entirely Elena's idea, which frankly should have been my very first red flag. My sister does not organize casual family gatherings unless there is an audience to witness her benevolence. She usually arrives late, complains about the valet, and leaves early because she has a charity gala to attend. So when she specifically chose the restaurant, a Michelin-starred French bistro downtown, and demanded I be there exactly at noon, I noticed. We sat in the corner booth, Elena and Marcus on one side, my 16-year-old niece Lily, beside me, my oldest mentor from the agency Sarah sitting at the end. I had invited Sarah at the last minute. Elena hadn't loved that. Elena was acting much warmer than usual that morning. She reached across the table and touched my hand twice. She asked about my sleep schedule, my stress levels, whether living alone in my townhouse was getting to be too overwhelming for my mental health. Marcus kept glancing down at the heavy leather briefcase resting by Elena's pristine heels. Not at his phone, at the briefcase. "You look so exhausted, Evie," Elena said, offering a tight, manufactured smile. "Doesn't she look exhausted, Marcus?" "I look like I work 60-hour weeks tracking federal wire transfers," I said evenly. "It's a demanding quarter." Lily, my niece, hid a small smile behind her orange juice. She was the only person at that table who ever hugged me like she actually meant it. Marcus ordered the most expensive appetizers for the entire table without asking anyone's preference. Elena complimented my vintage blazer, then complimented it again, which is the exact psychological tactic she employs right before she intends to ask for a massive favor. Sarah caught my eye over the artisan breadbasket. She had seen 100 corporate hostile takeovers go sideways. She knew the distinct look of a boardroom table being set for a hostile negotiation that nobody had warned you about. I sipped my sparkling water. I let them perform their little play. My sister only smiles with that level of radiant concern when she is about to ask for the exact thing she has already decided to steal. And her manicured hand kept drifting back down toward that leather briefcase on the floor. She waited patiently until the empty plates were cleared by the waiter. Predators always do that too. Evie, Marcus and I have been deeply worried about you, Elena said, her voice dropping an octave into a perfect register of feigned sorrow. Really deeply worried then. She reached into the briefcase. The brochure she pulled out was thick, glossy, and smelled like expensive ink. Serenity Pines Wellness and Psychiatric Retreat. The cover featured a photograph of a peaceful-looking woman practicing yoga by a pristine lake, a class I would rather swallow glass than attend. Elena slid it smoothly across the white linen tablecloth. We toured a beautiful facility for you, a residential retreat. You'll love the gardens. It's exactly what you need to reset. I stared at the glossy paper. You toured a psychiatric facility. Without me, we didn't want to trigger your anxiety, Marcus interjected, his voice as smooth as oiled glass. It's just safer this way, Evelyn. Professional staff around the clock, no more stress. No more living alone in that big empty house. It's $45,000 a month, I said, reading the tiny fine print at the bottom edge of the back cover completely upside down. Who exactly is paying for that? Elena's perfect smile tightened by a fraction of a millimeter. We'd figure out your assets. We can sell your townhouse, manage your portfolio for you while you rest. It just makes financial sense, Evie. There it was, sell the house, take the portfolio. My life's work. You've been so erratic lately, Elena pressed, leaning closer. You left the stove on last month when you visited. You forgot my birthday dinner. I had never left a stove on in my entire adult life, and I missed her birthday because I was testifying in a federal grand jury. See, that's the tragedy of it. She lowered her voice so the neighboring tables could just barely hear the performance. It's time, Evie. You just can't be trusted on your own anymore. The word trusted sat there on the linen tablecloth like a bloody knife. Lily went completely still beside me, her eyes wide with shock. Sarah set down her coffee cup very, very slowly. Marcus slid a thick, legal-looking admission packet halfway out of his briefcase. It was the exact calculated move a corporate lawyer makes when they genuinely believe the signature is already secured. They weren't worried. True worry does not tour a $45,000 facility. True worry does not appraise my townhouse. True worry does not bring legal conservatorship paperwork to a Sunday brunch. This was a hostile takeover, dressed up in the beautiful, suffocating garments of sisterly love. And they had clearly rehearsed this exact sequence for weeks. So I did what I do best. I analyzed the data, I looked at the glossy brochure, I looked at my sister's perfectly contoured face, and I picked up my black coffee, because the next sentence I delivered deserved a completely clean, dead steady voice. I took absolute time. I drank. I set the porcelain cup back into its saucer without making a single sound. That is a truly lovely brochure, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Very high-quality gloss, Evie. I already toured the suite they have waiting for you. Elena pleaded. I let the silence hang in the air for 3 agonizing seconds. I already toured your penthouse, I replied evenly. It's listed for sale. For one long suspended second, absolutely nobody moved. Elena's heavy silver fork slipped from her fingers and hit her porcelain plate. The clatter was small, yet it echoed like a gunshot in the quiet restaurant. What? She breathed out, her eyes darting in confusion. Your penthouse, I repeated, tone as pleasant as a Sunday breeze. The luxury condo on Pearl Street. I toured it on Tuesday. The professional photographer came on Wednesday. It went on the public market this morning. That's not a funny joke, Evelyn. Elena tried to force a laugh, but it cracked sharply in the middle of her throat. You can't list my apartment, can she? She looked at Marcus, and for the first time she didn't ask it like a rhetorical question. Marcus's smooth, confident face did something I hadn't seen it do in 10 years. It calculated panic. I watched him run the terrifying mathematics behind his eyes, and he clearly did not like the total. She's just confused, Marcus said to Elena, speaking entirely over me as if I were already institutionalized. Evelyn, you are deeply confused. I have traced and closed federal forensic audits on more shell companies than you have ever dreamed of. Marcus, I said, meticulously folding my linen napkin and placing it beside my plate. I am not confused, I am prepared. Sarah's mouth twitched into a microscopic knowing smile. Lily had completely stopped breathing. I did not explain how. I did not say one single syllable about property deeds, or the legal documents I had signed in absolute secret exactly 10 years ago. I decided to let them sit in the freezing cold water of uncertainty. Elena grabbed her iPhone, unlocked it, locked it, then put it back down on the table with a trembling hand. "You're bluffing," she hissed, her mask of loving sister completely shattering. She truly still thought it was a bluff. She would continue to think it was a bluff for about another 4 days, right up until a wealthy stranger requested to walk through her marble countertop kitchen. I picked up the dessert menu with absolute casualness, exactly as if the conversation had already been settled. "The lemon tart at this bistro is supposed to be extraordinary," I said. "Shall we order one to share?" Elena did not want the lemon tart. "This is clinically insane," she whispered viciously, leaning over the table. "You can't just Evie, look at me. This proves everything. This is exactly the kind of erratic delusion we are talking about." "What delusion?" I asked softly. "This threatening, unhinged behavior. You sound completely paranoid." And there it was, that is the classic move. I want you to understand this dynamic clearly. When the quiet, obedient woman finally speaks up and asserts a boundary, the toxic family instantly labels it as a symptom of a disease. "I sound like a woman who actually reads her own mail," I replied smoothly. Marcus leaned in, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Evelyn, nobody is the enemy here, we love you. We are simply trying to protect you from your own destructive habits. From yourself." A humming sound, the kind a seasoned federal investigator makes when they actively decide to commit every single spoken word to memory for a future deposition. Excellent, I wanted a credible witness, and I had deliberately brought one. Lily's eyes were shining with unshed tears, but she looked directly at her father. "Aunt Evie isn't paranoid," she said, her teenage voice shaking but surprisingly firm. "She is the sharpest person sitting at this table. Stay out of this, Lily." Elena snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. I didn't say another word. I simply pulled 2 crisp $100 bills from my wallet, slid them under my water glass for the waitstaff, and slid out of the leather booth slowly. I stood up on my own 2 feet, perfectly balanced, perfectly sane. "We will resume this conversation when you are actually ready to listen," I said, looking down at them. "Right now you are only ready to win, and I do not play games. Evie, sit down right now. People are staring at us, let them stare." I picked up my designer trench coat. I had spent 10 long years being the convenient scapegoat who sits down quietly to keep the peace. I was permanently done with that chair. I walked out past the maitre d's stand, past the wealthy couple at table 9 who had completely stopped chewing their duck confit just to watch the drama unfold. The brass bell over the heavy glass door rang softly behind me. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry when I reached my car. I simply sat behind the steering wheel of my Audi, hands perfectly steady, and let one massive question settle into the quiet interior of the vehicle. How does a younger sister end up legally owning the multi-million-dollar penthouse her older sister calls home? And never tell her why. The answer was sitting inside a fireproof steel lockbox hidden deep in my master closet. I drove home, taking the long scenic route, cruising slowly past the Pearl Street penthouse. The brand new polished mahogany for sale sign was already staked firmly into the manicured front lawn. My name was explicitly listed on the private agency mandate, not hers. When I finally arrived at my townhouse, I set the Serenity Pines psychiatric brochure face down on my absolute black granite kitchen counter. I didn't throw it in the trash. I wanted it sitting exactly right there so I could vividly remember exactly what they thought I was. Then I walked into my bedroom and unlocked the safe. Inside that steel box rests the entire hidden architecture of my quiet life. Federal clearance badges, investment deeds, commercial real estate portfolios, and one thick manila envelope that I had sealed shut exactly 10 years ago. I didn't open the envelope that night. I didn't need to. I had memorized every single clause. But you need to know how the penthouse happened, because it changes the context of everything that follows. 10 years ago, Marcus's very first tech startup collapsed in an absolute spectacular inferno of unpaid vendors and massive tax evasion. He had recklessly drained their joint accounts, leveraged their home, and gone bankrupt. Elena was 26, holding a terrified 6-year-old Lily, crying hysterically in a cramped, eviction-noticed apartment. So, I stepped in. I was 24, and I had just closed my very first massive federal auditing contract. I bought the Pearl Street penthouse in cash. I purchased it through a blind LLC, but the ultimate deed was registered strictly in my name on purpose, so that no aggressive bankruptcy lawyer or creditor of Marcus's could ever touch it. And I let Elena and Marcus move in for a token rent that conveniently drifted over the years to absolutely nothing. I never made my sister sign a thank you card. I never reminded her of the favor. I naively thought that unconditional love was clearer when you didn't keep a ruthless ledger. That was the toxic silence I told you about earlier. I allowed her to slowly believe the luxury apartment was simply hers, the same way ignorant children believe the electricity stays on by magic. I had kept that manila envelope perfectly folded for 10 years. By the end of this month, my entire extended family would painfully learn exactly what was inside it, and why I had ruthlessly kept it. But first, they desperately tried to convince the entire world that I was losing my mind. If you have ever been the quiet one in your family, the one everybody arrogantly assumes will just surrender and go along with the abuse, I see you. This is the exact chapter where I permanently stopped going along. Stay with me. It only gets colder and clearer from here, and if you believe that a woman's dignity and financial independence are not up for a Democratic family vote, hit subscribe right now so the next part of the story finds you. The psychological warfare started that very night. My iPhone lit up at 9 p.m. Elena. Evie, I am so deeply scared for you. You are confused and you absolutely refuse to admit it. Elena, please let us step in and help before you seriously hurt yourself. Elena, I already called our parents. Mom agrees with me completely. My parents, retired, comfortably living off a pension and allergic to any form of conflict that didn't directly benefit them. If Elena called them, it was strictly to build a chorus of fake concern, not to ask for an objective opinion. My phone aggressively buzzed again at 11 p.m., then again at midnight. I didn't answer a single text. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea. I read every single message twice, the way I used to dissect a hostile corporate contract. Not looking for the emotional feeling, but scanning for the underlying structure. And the structure told me something bone-chillingly cold. This wasn't a loving older sister panicking about my health. Genuine panic is messy, emotional, and disorganized. This was exceptionally tidy. The specific buzzwords: confused, hurt yourself, mom agrees. Those were carefully selected legal terms being lined up on a digital record, exactly the way a prosecutor lines up exhibits before a grand jury hearing. She wasn't venting her frustrations at me, she was actively documenting me. I had investigated this exact scenario for a federal client once, years ago. A greedy nephew who desperately wanted hostile control of his wealthy aunt's massive estate started a completely fabricated paper trail of mental incidents. One supposedly misplaced utility bill here, a confused and completely exaggerated phone call there. By the time any judge bothered to look closely at the case, the nephew had a file 3 inches thick describing a tragic mental decline that had never actually happened. I slowly set my iPhone down on the cold granite counter right beside the face-down psychiatric brochure. A serene garden photo on one side, a calculated smear campaign on the other. Same morning, same sister. They didn't want me to be safe and healthy. They wanted me to be declared legally incompetent. I calmly rinsed my porcelain teacup, dried it with a towel, and put it away in the cabinet. Then I sat down at my laptop and started doing what I had foolishly told myself for 10 years I would never have to do to my own blood relatives. I started gathering lethal ammunition, because if my sister wanted to build a documented record, I would absolutely ensure that my record was the one that brutally destroyed hers. By Sunday afternoon, the orchestrated phone calls began. Not directly from Elena, but from the extended family. My older cousin Sarah Jane called first, her voice practically dripping with syrupy, fake concern. Evie Hart, we just want what is best for you. Elena says you have been struggling so much lately. Struggling with what exactly, Sarah Jane? I asked coolly. With the stove incident, the memory lapses, your terrifying public outburst at the French bistro yesterday. I didn't have an outburst, I simply paid my bill and left a restaurant. Elena said you maliciously threatened to make her and Lily homeless. There it was, the absolute lie, already polished and distributed into a tragic narrative. I had threatened her. I was unstable. The woman who meticulously tracked international money laundering syndicates for the FBI had overnight miraculously become a tragic danger to herself. Sarah Jane, I said, keeping my voice incredibly soft. Did Elena happen to tell you whose exact name is on the legal deed to that penthouse? A long, confused pause echoed on the line. She said it's hers and Marcus's. Did she now? I hung up the phone gently, then my uncle called with the exact same rehearsed script. Then a close family friend gently asked if I had considered getting a medical evaluation. That specific legal word again, evaluated, I understood exactly what was happening. Alina wasn't just maliciously gossiping about me, she was actively assembling a jury of my peers, one strategic phone call at a time, so that when the real legal move came, everyone would have already been brainwashed to believe the verdict. Everyone agrees you are rapidly slipping, Evie, she texted me late that Sunday evening. Don't make this harder than it has to be, everyone. As if a perfectly sane woman could be voted out of her own mental competence by a majority rule of greedy relatives. I will openly admit it stung fiercely, not the pathetic lie itself but the terrifying speed. How incredibly fast people who I had generously fed at my own dining table blindly chose to believe the louder, more dramatic story. But as a forensic auditor, I noticed something entirely. In every single phone call, the exact same detail surfaced. The penthouse, my investment portfolio, my assets, not my actual health, the real estate concern, it turns out, has a very specific, calculable price tag if you read it closely enough. And somewhere out there in the dark, someone was writing these fake incidents down. Dates times a tidy little legal file. I just didn't know yet exactly who was holding the pen. I found out exactly who held the pen on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I didn't even have to hire a private investigator. My niece Lily brought the evidence straight to my front door. Lily showed up unannounced after her high school classes, her expensive raincoat soaking wet, her eyes bloodshot from crying. Evie, she practically fell into my hallway before I could even close the front door. I heard them. I heard Mom and Dad talking in the home office. I wasn't supposed to be home early. I immediately pulled her inside and handed her a warm towel. Take a breath, Lily, tell me. They have a massive binder, Aunt Evie. Lily's voice shook violently. Dad keeps it locked in his bottom desk drawer. It's full of dates and fake stories, times you supposedly forgot things or acted crazy. I figured as much. There's much worse, she whispered, pressing her hands to her pale face. They want to move aggressively fast. Dad told his lawyer they have to do it before you change any of your financial paperwork. Before you can legally hire an attorney to block them. So that was the invisible ticking clock. They weren't genuinely afraid I was incompetent. They were absolutely terrified I was highly capable. Lily, I said gently, placing a hand on her trembling shoulder. This is not your burden to carry, you basically raised me. She said it fiercely, like an undeniable fact, not a fleeting emotion. When Mom was busy at galas and Dad was networking, you were the one who taught me to ride a bike. You paid for my private tutoring. I am not abandoning you to them. I am generally not a crier. But I had to look away toward the rain-streaked window for a long moment to compose myself. Did you happen to see what else was inside that folder? I asked, my voice steadying into its professional chill. There's a hospital admission form with your full legal name already printed on it, she swallowed hard. And legal papers about guardianship, power of attorney, a conservatorship, the whole set. Okay, I took a deep freezing breath. Thank you, Lily. You did the absolutely right thing by coming to me. What are you going to do? She asked, her eyes wide with fear. I thought about the deed in my safe, the psychiatric brochure, the doctor's appointment I had preemptively scheduled for tomorrow. I am going to let them keep blindly building their pathetic little case, I said softly. And I am going to make absolutely sure mine is the one that legally destroys theirs. Lily frowned, confused. That's it? You're just going to wait? I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile, it was the smile of a forensic predator who had just spotted the bleeding prey. Watch, wait, and sign last, but first there's a financial trail I need to follow. After Lily left, I've my encrypted federal workstation. If Marcus was desperately accelerating a hostile conservatorship, it meant he was drowning in immediate debt. And I was the best forensic auditor in the tri-state area. It took me less than 4 hours to rip through the firewall of his public LLCs and cross-reference the dark money. It was worse than I thought. Marcus's new crypto logistics startup was a catastrophic Ponzi scheme. He had a notice of default on a massive hidden business loan. An $800 lien was about to drop on his head. They were 3 months behind on multiple high-interest credit lines. They weren't rich, successful socialites scheming for simply more wealth. They were completely bankrupt, drowning in toxic debt, and they had frantically looked around the room for the nearest life raft they could violently steal. A multi-million-dollar portfolio, owned by a 34-year-old sister they had arrogantly said they could declare legally insane. And there was the older, deeper wound hiding underneath the spreadsheets. 10 years ago I had rescued Elena from this exact same nightmare. She had never been forced to learn how to financially swim, so when the toxic water rose again, She didn't aggressively look for a job or cut her luxury budget. She reached for my throat. I understood the psychology of it. I even ached over it for a fleeting second. The desperate girl crying in that apartment 10 years ago had mutated into a ruthless woman who couldn't tell the difference between being graciously saved and being infinitely owed. But understanding trauma is not the same as allowing abuse. Financial desperation explains a person's motives. It absolutely does not legally entitle them to your bank accounts, your real estate deeds, or forging your name on a psychiatric hospital form. I sat in the blue light of my monitors for a long time. I briefly thought about quietly paying off his $800,000 debt. The old toxic family freaks rescue them first, ask questions never. Then I slammed the laptop shut. That exact cowardly reflex was exactly how we got here. I had loved my sister into falsely believing that my love was a blank checkbook she could violently write against forever. Not anymore. The most truly loving thing left to do was to let her violently crash into the concrete floor. The forced family intervention was scheduled for exactly 10 days from now. I know exactly how this psychological torture feels from the inside. When the very blood relatives you sacrificed your youth to protect start maliciously talking about you in the third person in a room you're standing in. If that is a deep wound you currently carry, leave the word survivor in the comments right now. I read every single one of them, and if a brutally calm paper and patience kind of legal justice is your ultimate idea of satisfying entertainment, subscribe now, because the intervention meeting they maliciously set to corner me is exactly where every single thing violently turns upside down. Elena officially called to formally invite me to my own forced intervention on a Thursday afternoon. Sunday at 2 p.m., she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Everyone is coming to your townhouse. Mom and Dad are flying in. Please, Evie, just be open-minded. We are doing this strictly because we love you so much. In my own living room, I said softly, staring at my encrypted forensic monitors. How incredibly generous of you. Don't be difficult, Evelyn. We are bringing a professional to help mediate the transition. I'll be there, I said. 2 p.m. I'll make French press coffee. She paused on the line, genuinely thrown off balance by how remarkably easy it was. She had desperately braced for a screaming match and had gotten a polite hostess instead. You are being weirdly calm about this, she said suspiciously. I am 34 years old, Elena, I replied, my voice as smooth as black ice. I have completely stopped wasting my energy fighting gravity. After she nervously hung up the phone, I will openly admit I sat in my expensive ergonomic chair and grinned at the office wall. They arrogantly thought they were setting a brilliant trap. They were actually sending in an RSVP to their own financial execution. I picked up my phone and called Victoria Vanguard, the most ruthless, high-powered estate attorney in the city. I had sent her dozens of lucrative corporate clients over my career. Victoria is 62, wears exclusively vintage Chanel and not so suffer fools. Sunday at 2, my townhouse full toxic family, I told her. They are bringing a consultant with conservatorship papers. Do you want me physically present in the room? She asked, her voice cracking like a whip. No, I said, if a lawyer is in the room they will scream that I am being illegally coached. I want it to be just me, my greedy family, and the brutal truth. But I want you on standby if I need to drop the absolute hammer. I already have the trust paperwork drafted, Victoria purred. We lock the estate into an irrevocable blind trust tomorrow morning. By the time they desperately try to file a single petition, there will be absolutely nothing left for them to grab. I am naming Sarah and myself jointly on the legal documents as your power of attorney. Not Elena, not my parents, the two people in my life who actually showed up without a parasitic angle. Good, I said, 2 clean witnesses beat 20 brainwashed cousins. But a lawyer was only half of the required armor. The very next morning I drove directly to the private office of Dr. Eris Thorne. Doc Thorne is a board-certified Ivy League forensic psychiatrist. I didn't schedule a casual therapy session to talk about my feelings. I scheduled a grueling 4-hour full-spectrum cognitive and psychiatric evaluation. I sat in his minimalist office and laid out the exact details: the brunch, the fake incidents folder, the psychiatric brochure, and the October 30th deadline. He didn't gasp in horror or pat my hand condescendingly. He simply pulled out his heavy clinical assessment binders. Full neuropsychological battery, he said crisply. Executive function, complex reasoning, emotional regulation, and reality testing. We date it, we officially notarize it, we make it legally bulletproof. It took 4 exhausting hours of logic puzzles, memory stress tests, and psychiatric profiling. The kind of brutal clinical test that offers absolutely no mercy. 2 days later, he called me back into his office and slid a thick, officially sealed medical report across his mahogany desk. Cognition and executive function perfectly intact in the top 1 percentile, he read aloud. No clinical evidence of psychiatric impairment whatsoever. Patient is remarkably lucid, highly organized, and exceptionally capable of managing complex financial and personal affairs. I would be more than comfortable saying that directly to a federal judge under oath, Doctor. Thorne added, handing me the sealed envelope. You might actually have to, I replied, slipping the invincible document into my leather briefcase. Now my legal and medical armor was completely flawless. I just had to wait for them to arrogantly walk directly into the spikes. They felt me getting ready. Predators always do, even when they can't articulate what they sense shifting in the atmosphere. So Elena aggressively escalated the public smear campaign. A massive group email went out to the entire extended family on Friday evening. Subject line: an honest update about Evelyn's mental health. 22 relatives were BCC'd: aunts, uncles, my parents, and a handful of wealthy family. I will spare you the pathetic melodramatic details. The basic gist: I was rapidly declining, I was hallucinating ownership of properties, I had viciously threatened to render my own sister homeless. The family would be gathering to make a loving, necessary medical intervention for my own safety. A loving intervention for Evelyn, whether Evelyn liked it or not. Within 45 minutes, my iPhone filled with replies that made my blood run absolute zero. So sorry, Elena, you are such a brave older sister. Let us know how we can help manage her affairs. My own mother actually replied all. Evelyn was always so stubborn and weird as a child. This explains everything. Stubborn. Yes, I built a multi-million-dollar empire from absolutely nothing by being beautifully stubborn. Then came the exact call I expected, my father finally weighing in from his comfortable golf course retirement home. Evie, I don't want to take sides, he said nervously, which is the universal coward's phrase for when they have already decisively taken a side. Then don't sign any legal documents, Dad, I said, my voice completely flat. Elena is just overwhelmed, Evie. She thinks if everyone is there on Sunday, you'll finally see medical reason. Which specific medical reason, Dad? The one with my psychiatric involuntary hold already printed out. Complete silence on the line. He hadn't known that horrifying part, or more likely he had briefly scanned it and purposefully chose not to comprehend it. It's not exactly like that, sweetheart, he stammered weakly. It is exactly like that. I have read their entire playbook. I let him sit in the agonizing quiet for a long moment. The exact way I used to sit quietly when he would break promises to me as a child. I'll be there, I finally said. I wouldn't miss my own execution for the world. Saturday morning, the day before the intervention, I made one final devastating phone call. I dialed the elite real estate agent who was aggressively handling the Pearl Street penthouse listing. She had exceptional news for me, the kind of news that makes a forensic auditor smile in the dark. Evelyn, we have a fully vetted offer, the agent said, practically vibrating with excitement. A wealthy international tech executive, cash buyer, $6.2 million, no contingencies. And here is the kicker, he wants an aggressive 15-day close. He needs to move his family in by the 1st of next month. The 1st of the month, the exact same week Marcus's stolen calendar indicated I would be permanently checking into the Serenity Pines psychiatric ward. I almost laughed out loud at the poetic symmetry of the universe. While they had been meticulously scheduling my permanent exit from my own life, I had been legally arranging Elena's brutal exit from hers. Legally, publicly, with her forged signature on absolutely nothing. Accept the offer immediately, I told the agent. Send me the electronic DocuSign, consider it sold. The line that had cracked a silver fork in half at the Sunday brunch was now a legally binding $6 million sales contract sitting securely in my encrypted email. Saturday night, I methodically laid everything out on my dining room table and packed it the exact way I would want a federal prosecutor to find it. In chronological order, clean, irrefutable, and completely undeniable. I started with the original manila envelope. Inside went the original stamped deed to the Pearl Street penthouse. Grantee Evelyn Vance, sole owner, 10-year, impeccably clean. Next went the printed real estate listing and the executed $6.2 million cash contract, my signature, the address, the glossy photos of the marble kitchen where Elena arrogantly hosted her fake charity dinners. Next went Dr. Thorne's psychological evaluation, heavily sealed, officially signed, and brutally conclusive. Cognition intact, no impairment. Then went the massive forensic audit file I had personally compiled on Marcus. The defaulted $800,000 loan, the Ponzi scheme shell companies, the 3 months of missed massive credit card payments. And on top of all of it, last I gently placed a faded photograph. Elena at 26 standing in the doorway of that exact penthouse holding 6-year-old Lily. Both of them crying with absolute relief because they finally had a door that locked from the inside. A door I had bought in cash so Marcus's creditors couldn't violently take it from them. I looked at that photograph for a long, heavy time. Everything I needed to utterly destroy them and win my absolute freedom fit neatly inside one single leather portfolio. I didn't have hidden audio recordings, I didn't have a screaming, emotional diary of resentment. This wasn't a pathetic ledger of sibling jealousy, it was a cold, hard record of federal law and documented reality. Which it turns out are the only two things that actually hold up under immense pressure. Tomorrow afternoon they would confidently sit in my own living room, absolutely certain they had already won the war. And I would open this portfolio one devastating item at a time. I set it by the front door so I wouldn't forget it. Then I went upstairs, took a hot shower, and to my own absolute surprise, slept for 8 straight hours like a woman with absolutely nothing to hide. Sunday arrived, the air outside was crisp, cold, and clear, everything felt bright right before it violently let go. I had spent my entire adult life quietly tracing other people's fraudulent crimes into the federal record. Today I would brutally sign my own family's fraud into the history books. At 1:30 p.m. Lily slipped through the back garden door of my townhouse and found me calmly adjusting the French press in the kitchen. Aunt Evie, she was breathless, her raincoat soaked again. I have to warn you before they get here, the consultant is coming with them, a guy named Vance Cruz. He specializes in elderly transitions, but Dad hired him to aggressively handle your conservatorship. I know, Lily, I said, pouring her a small cup of hot cocoa. He is walking into a massacre. Lily looked absolutely terrified. Where is Mom going to live when this is over? She whispered. It was the absolute right question, and it told me everything about which of the Vance women I had actually raised correctly. That, I said gently, tucking a stray hair behind her ear, is a financial question your mother should have extensively researched before she arrogantly scheduled my permanent room at a psychiatric ward. I didn't say it with malice, I said it like a final closing statement to a jury. Outside, a heavy Mercedes SUV pulled aggressively into a driveway. Then my parents' rental car, then another luxury sedan. Car doors slammed heavily, echoing voices filled the crisp autumn air. Lily instinctively squeezed my hand, her knuckles turning white. Stay quietly by the bay window, I instructed her softly. Whatever happens in this room today, you absolutely do not have to say a single word unless you actively want to. Just be a silent witness to the truth. The doorbell rang forcefully in my own house. I picked up the heavy leather portfolio, took one final deep breath, and walked calmly to the front door to let my toxic family inside. They immediately flooded my living room like an invading army that already owned the territory. Elena, Marcus, my parents' 3 aunts, 2 nosy cousins, and the consultant Vance Cruz, overly bright blazer that smelled heavily of cheap cologne and predatory legal fees. I made them coffee, I offered them artisanal pastries, I graciously let them get as comfortable as possible. I wanted them relaxed. Evie, sit down, Elena commanded softly, instantly taking possession of my favorite velvet armchair. We need to talk. I sat smoothly on the long sofa, the leather portfolio resting quietly beside me. The trap was fully set, the execution was about to begin. Lily stood completely frozen by the heavy oak bay window, her eyes wide as saucers, observing the orchestrated chaos. Vance Cruz, the hired legal mercenary, naturally took the immediate lead. He unzipped a thick, imposing black leather portfolio and projected a gentle, obnoxiously practiced voice that he likely used on terrified widows on a daily basis. Evelyn, my dear, your entire family loves you very much. They are deeply concerned about your recent safety, your erratic behavior, and your fading financial judgment. He smoothly opened the portfolio on my glass coffee table. We have prepared some standard documents just to make things easier and safer for everyone involved. He slid 2 thick stacks of legal paper across the glass table directly toward me, carefully placing an expensive silver pen directly on top. A voluntary transition agreement and a medical power of attorney. We just need your signature right here. He tapped the bottom line, and we can all stop worrying and get you the professional help you desperately deserve. Sign it, Evie, Elena said, leaning forward. Her voice aggressively wobbled between a commanding shriek and a pathetic plea. Please, just sign it before this gets embarrassingly ugly. And if I don't, I asked smoothly, not even glancing down at the papers. Then we let the federal court decide whether you are mentally fit to be making these life decisions at all. Marcus spoke up for the very first time, his voice flat, arrogant, and cold. The entire living room went completely silent. They arrogantly thought the quiet meant they had successfully won the standoff. A nosy cousin murmured from the back of the room, "It's strictly for the best, Evie." Just listen to Elena. My father aggressively studied the intricate patterns on my Turkish rug. I looked at the legal papers, I looked at the silver pen placed so helpfully, pointing directly toward the rest of my life in a locked psychiatric ward. "I am absolutely not signing anything today," I said. My hand resting on the arm of the sofa didn't even twitch. I vividly noticed that after 10 long years of quietly going along to keep the fragile peace, the one time it truly mattered the absolute most, my pulse was perfectly, beautifully still. "Evelyn, please," Elena started, but since everyone is already gathered here, I cut her off smoothly. "Let's make a loving family plan together, shall we?" I reached my right hand over and confidently grabbed my heavy leather portfolio. "Before I open this," I said, resting my hand firmly on the thick leather, "I want to be completely fair. Everyone sitting in this room received exactly one highly manipulated version of the story. Elena sent you an email, you all rushed here to help me see reason." A few heads in the room nodded, suddenly uncertain of the shifting atmosphere. "So I am going to generously give you the other version. Not shouted in a public restaurant, not hidden in a cowardly BC'd email, right here, where you can look at the cold hard evidence with your own two eyes and decide for yourselves." "Evie, do not make a dramatic scene," Elena hissed, her eyes darting nervously toward Marcus. "This isn't a scene, sweetheart," I replied, my voice dropping to a terrifying absolute calm. "It is a forensic closing. I have executed hundreds of them. They are very quiet and they are incredibly lethal." Vance Cruz shifted uncomfortably in his overly bright blazer. "Evelyn, I really don't think you are an uninvited guest in my private home." "Cruz," I snapped, my eyes locking onto his like a sniper. "You will get your turn to speak when I decide I want to buy something from you." One of my aunts let out a shocked, involuntary snort of laughter, then quickly covered her mouth. Lily nodded once, steady and proud from the window. I physically felt the entire room tilt just slightly on its axis. The loyal jury Elena had so carefully assembled was suddenly no longer absolutely sure which way the legal verdict ran. That is the fascinating thing about a hostile audience. You can temporarily borrow their loyalty with a loud lie, but you can never keep it. The absolute second a calmer, clearer documented story violently walks into the room, the crowd quietly switches sides and they never bother to tell the liar they have abandoned ship. I unzipped my leather portfolio, the heavy zipper sounded like a chainsaw in the dead silent room. "This is absolutely everything," I announced loudly. "Every single medical and financial claim made about me in the past 30 days, answered permanently on federal paper. Let's go through it together, item by excruciating item, and then you can all mathematically decide who in this family actually needs to be legally locked away." I lifted out the first thick document. Elena leaned aggressively forward, and for the very first time all month, she looked genuinely, physically terrified. I held the first paper but deliberately didn't unfold it yet. I wanted one last, brutal breath of honesty before the execution. "You all think this is about my mental health?" I said, looking around the room. "It isn't. It is entirely about one word: trusted." My sister loudly declared at a French bistro that I couldn't be trusted on my own. I turned my eyes directly to Elena. "So let's talk extensively about trust. 10 years ago, Marcus's first tech startup spectacularly collapsed due to massive tax evasion and unpaid debts. He drained your accounts and his creditors came violently after everything you had. You stood sobbing in a cramped hallway with little Lily on your hip and absolutely nowhere to go." Elena's face violently drained of all color. She had never expected the buried past to violently resurrect in this room. "Who exactly showed up, Elena?" I asked quietly, my voice slicing through the silence. "Who wrote a massive check so that Marcus wouldn't face a federal indictment? Who made absolutely sure that no bankruptcy lawyer could ever touch the luxury roof over your daughter's head?" She didn't answer, she couldn't breathe. My parents stared at her in absolute horrified shock. They had always assumed Marcus's wealthy parents had bailed them out. "I am not saying this to publicly shame you," I continued smoothly. "I am saying it because you stood sobbing in a safe, luxurious doorway that I personally built for you in cash. And 10 years later, you aggressively used the exact same kind of legal paperwork to maliciously try to lock me in a psychiatric ward and steal everything I have worked for." The aunts and cousins were completely, terrifyingly still now. My father looked down at his trembling hands. Lily was quietly crying tears of absolute vindication by the bay window. She remembered that horrible cramped hallway. She had been 6 years old. I loved you in the absolute quietest way possible, I said, my voice hardening into steel. No receipts, no daily reminders. I naively thought that was the highest form of family loyalty. I was completely wrong about that. Quiet love allows toxic people to comfortably forget exactly who paid for the concrete floor they are standing on. I snapped the first document open. So here is me finally speaking up. Better late than buried alive in a psychiatric brochure. I physically turned the heavy paper around so the entire living room could clearly see the federal stamp. Let's start, I said, with whose exact name is on what. I violently slammed the original deed onto the glass coffee table. But right before it landed, Marcus aggressively made his desperate final move. They always do, the cornered rats. He practically leaped out of his chair, reached violently into his briefcase, and slammed the Serenity Pines brochure directly onto the glass table, attempting to physically cover my deed with his glossy lie. The exact same glossy brochure, the smiling woman, the watercolor class, and clipped directly to the front of it now was the official Serenity Pines pre-admission form, my full name already typed at the top. This is the responsible medical plan, Marcus announced to the room, shouting aggressively, performing a desperate theater for the shocked cousins. A safe, secure place with professional psychiatric care. We have already paid the deposit and reserved her room for the first of the month. He violently tapped the admission form. All we need is a signature, hers or the judge's. We would vastly prefer it to be hers, my mother murmured, a faint sound of nervous approval. Elena nodded frantically, desperately trying to gather her alienated jury back to her side. For one agonizing, suspended moment, the glossy brochure sat aggressively on top of my federal deed. The loud lie physically sitting on top of the quiet truth. The room leaned slightly toward the brighter, easier picture, the exact way terrified rooms always do. I let it sit there. I didn't snatch it away. Snatching looks exactly like panic, and panic was the only weapon they had left. Instead, I picked up the psychiatric brochure with 2 fingers, the exact way a forensic examiner lifts a bloody piece of evidence at a crime scene. And I read the aggressive price tag aloud. $45,000 a month, I said coldly. For me, funded aggressively by Lee forcing the sale of my townhouse. I deliberately set the brochure down, face up, pushed far to the side of the table. Let's leave that right there, I said, a beautiful picture of exactly where they want me to rot. Now, let me systematically show you the terrifying paperwork they desperately prayed I would never, ever read. I slid the federal deed directly into the center of the glass table and held it up to the light. Marcus, I said, staring directly into his terrified, sweating face. You are about to painfully learn the brutal difference between a parasitic man who tours a luxury penthouse and a forensic auditor who actually owns it in cash. Vance Cruz's silver pen, abandoned uselessly on the glass table, suddenly looked incredibly pathetic. Elena physically saw the stamped deed coming and panicked the absolute only way she knew how. She went completely hysterical. Do not listen to her, Elena shrieked, practically jumping out of her chair, turning wildly to the terrified cousins. This is exactly what I have been trying to tell you. She gets fixated. She makes up insane, elaborate stories about owning things. She thinks she owns my luxury apartment now. Elena forced a laugh that sounded like shattering glass, violently sweeping her hand at me. Do you hear her insanity? It's time, Evie, you cannot be trusted. The aggressive words hung in the dead air, the exact same manipulative words from the Michelin-starred brunch. But this time the room did not move an inch with her. They looked at the incredibly steady, terrifyingly calm woman sitting on the sofa, with a portfolio of federal evidence, and they looked at the screaming, shaking woman in the armchair, and something completely shattered. Sit down and shut up, Elena, my father finally said, his voice shaking with absolute horror. Let Evelyn speak, his own golden daughter. He couldn't fully process the shock, but he absolutely could not stomach the hysterical sound of her lies anymore either. Stay out of this, Dad, she aggressively snapped back at him. Elena, one of the older aunts said, using the exact tone used on a rabid dog. You might aggressively want to hear this before you humiliate yourself any further. Vance Cruz slowly, silently zipped his leather portfolio shut. He had executed dozens of these hostile conservatorships. He knew the exact chilling sound a fraudulent deal makes when it violently dies on the table. And he had just heard the fatal gunshot. Elena looked around the room, desperately searching for her loyal jury, and found an entire row of terrified people physically leaning as far away from her as possible. Evelyn, she whispered, and now there was raw, naked terror hiding underneath the aggressive anger. What exactly is in that portfolio? I had waited 10 agonizing years to be asked that exact question by someone who was finally terrified enough to hear the brutal answer. She wasn't ready, but she was about to find out anyway. Absolutely everything, I said, calm as still water. Let's start directly with your front door, and I read the legal name on the federal deed out loud. Pearl Street Luxury Condominiums, I read, my voice echoing level and completely clear. Grantee Evelyn Vance, officially recorded 10 years ago, absolutely no transfers, no second name ever added. Completely free and clear, absolute suffocating silence, that is the multi-million-dollar penthouse my sister has arrogantly called hers for 10 years. I said, looking at the shocked faces of my relatives. It has never, for one single microscopic day, been in her name. It is legally in mine because I bought it in cash. Elena's mouth opened violently, but absolutely no sound came out. I aggressively set the federal deed down on the glass and lifted the second thick document. This is the executed listing agreement, the same penthouse put on the public market legally by the sole owner. Me, I laid it brutally beside the deed, and this is the final sales contract as of yesterday morning. It has a vetted cash buyer, full asking price $6.2 million. They officially close and move in on the 1st of the month. One of the cousins aggressively gasped. Marcus sat down on the sofa so hard it cracked. I lifted the third heavily sealed document. This is a full forensic cognitive evaluation. Aggressively dated 2 days ago, heavily signed by a board-certified Ivy League psychiatrist. Cognition flawlessly intact, absolutely no psychiatric impairment whatsoever. I turned my eyes directly to Vance Cruz. Your entire capacity case is a single pathetic forged sticky note, Mr. Cruz. Mine is a heavily notarized medical fortress. If you ever attempt to file that fraudulent petition in a federal court, I will personally see that you are criminally disbarred. I set down the psychiatric report and reached for the final devastating thick folder. The forensic audit. Marcus went completely terrifyingly pale. I won't read the entire tragic thing, I said softly. But there is a default notice in here, an $800,000 hidden business loan. A failed Ponzi scheme, 3 months behind. You didn't tour a psychiatric ward because you loved me. Marcus, you scheduled my aggressive disappearance because you are drowning in toxic debt, and I was the wealthiest life raft you could violently steal. The room violently exploded. Marcus leaped up, practically screaming, not at me but aggressively at Elena. You told me she was weak, you told me she wouldn't fight back. Elena shrieked right back at him, her entire elegant facade crumbling into absolute pathetic dust. They turned on each other like starving wolves, tearing their own fraudulent marriage apart in front of the entire horrified family. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't try to aggressively interrupt them, I simply watched the beautiful execution I had meticulously orchestrated. And in case anyone in this violently toxic room still secretly thinks they are ever getting a single dime of my money, I announced loudly over their pathetic screaming. Every single asset I own is now heavily locked inside an irrevocable blind trust that the federal law will absolutely never let you touch. I looked directly at my niece, who was standing tall by the window. Lily, go pack a bag. You are staying in my guest room until this pathetic circus burns completely to the ground. She aggressively wiped a tear, nodded fiercely, and ran up the stairs. I stood up smoothly, adjusted my vintage blazer, and picked up my empty coffee cup. The meeting is permanently adjourned, I said to the room. You all know exactly where the front door is. Please make sure not to forcefully let it hit you on your way out. I turned my back and gracefully walked into the kitchen, leaving them completely drowning in the absolute wreckage of their own toxic lies and profound failures. I did not aggressively look back. I absolutely did not need to. The ultimate defining walk moment is absolutely never about aggressively looking back to see their faces. It is completely about the profound realization that you will absolutely never have to return to their poisonous ecosystem ever again. If you have ever been forced to walk away from the people who were supposed to protect you, I want you to internalize this absolute truth. Your silence is not weakness, your patience is not submission. It is simply the calculated time it takes to quietly build an indestructible empire from the ground up. They will laugh at your thrift store sweaters, they will mock your quiet focus. Let them laugh. Let them mistakenly underestimate you, because the greatest revenge is perfectly legal, flawlessly executed, and undeniable. Next time they slide a forged contract across the table, just softly smile and hand them the sold sign. Thank you for listening. If this journey ignited a fire inside your soul, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and never apologize for building your own kingdom in the beautiful silence.